everyone, and welcome to another interview for part of our 10th anniversary Heart for PCOS campaign. Today, I have the pleasure and honor of sitting down with a very special guest, Dr. Mark Ratner. Dr. Ratner is the Chief Science Officer of Theralogix, a Washington, D.C.-based company which markets micronutrient supplements with a focus on reproductive health. Prior to joining Theralogix, Dr. Ratner ran his Washington, D.C.-based practice for 30 years, focused on male reproductive health. He has been an investigator for dozens of clinical trials and served as the Director of Male Reproductive Medicine for one of the largest IVF practices in the country. Additionally, he has spoken at dozens of national meetings covering topics across a wide range of medical specialties, including nutrition, male and female fertility, rheumatology, OBGYN, urology, and pain management. Welcome, Dr. Ratner. Thank you so much for taking the time to sit down and talk with us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Ashley.
Absolutely. I am so excited to be able to chat with you today regarding a supplement many in the PCOS community want to know more about, which is inositol, particularly Theralogix Avasitol. So I wanted to start off by asking you a few questions to help our viewers better understand inositol. But before I do that, I wanted to let our viewers know, if you are watching today, you have an opportunity to win a 3-month supply of Theralogix Avasitol. So make sure to watch the entire interview and to leave your comments, and we will announce a winner at the end of the interview. So, Dr. Ratner, what exactly is inositol?
Inositols, and actually it's not just one compound. It's actually a class of compounds. So we say inositols, plural. They are technically what are known as sugar alcohols. This is a class of compounds that includes some other things that are perhaps a little bit more familiar, things like mannitol, sorbitol, xylitol. Some of those things are used as sweeteners, right? And the inositols, there's actually 9 of them. They're found in our diet. Okay, these are compounds. They're technically sugar alcohols. We get them in fruits and vegetables, and they play a very important role in our bodies. They actually allow certain hormones to do their job. That's probably the simplest way to put it. And there's 2 of those inositols. There's actually 9 different inositols, and we call those stereoisomers. If you remember back to high school chemistry, stereoisomers mean they all have the same chemical formula, but their structure is slightly different. And 2 of the 9 are really important in our bodies. One being myo-inositol, and the other one being D-chiroinositol.
Yes, and those are 2 that you hear a lot when you hear people talking about supplementation for PCOS. So with these inositols, the D-chiro and the myo, why are they important to the function of the body, and why in particular with PCOS may they be a consideration?
Well, the reason that inositols, the way that they play this role is they act as what we call second messengers for certain hormones. And there's 3 hormones that are probably the most important ones to think about. One is insulin. The second one is FSH, or follicle stimulating hormone. And the third one is TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone. So what happens with any hormone, and by the way, let's just understand, what is a hormone? A hormone is a substance that's made in our body, and what defines a hormone is that it's made in one place of the body and it acts in another. So it circulates through the body and it then exerts its action, the hormone, at a distant location from where it was made. So insulin, great example. It's made in the pancreas, but almost all of our cells, muscle cells, fat cells, have what we call an insulin receptor on the surface. And this is the same with all hormones. The cell on the surface is a receptor where the hormone binds. Once the hormone binds to the receptor, typically what happens is the receptor then releases into the cell what we call second messengers.
Okay.
And those second messengers then tell the cell what to do. In the case of insulin, it tells the cell, take the glucose in from the bloodstream, burn the glucose for energy, or maybe store it later for later use as glycogen. Okay. And so, in order for the hormone to work, once it binds to the receptor has to release second messengers. And it turns out that those second messengers are made from inositols.
Wow. Okay, you just taught me something that I had no idea about. That's amazing.
So myoinositol and dechirioinositol, both of those function as second messengers for the insulin receptor, the follicle stimulating hormone, FSH receptor, and any woman who is potentially going through fertility treatment is very familiar with that FSH blood test, right? And also thyroid hormone receptor. So that's why inositol is so important.
Yes. So I'm assuming what happens then is with PCOS, these messages aren't getting to the cells properly. Am I correct in saying that?
So it turns out that in PCOS, the function of those second messengers, the proper functioning of, let's say, the insulin receptor, requires that those two second messengers be present in a certain ratio. And it turns out that the ratio under normal conditions is different in, say, muscle tissue than it would be in the ovary. In the ovary, you're supposed to have more myoinositol than dechirioinositol. In the peripheral tissues, like muscle and fat tissues, periphery of the body, the ratio is different. You want a little bit more dechiro and a little bit less myo. So the proper ratio for the balance between those two different second messengers varies from one tissue to the next. And what can happen, and this is what does happen in PCOS, is the ratio gets out of whack. Okay. And when that ratio is out of whack, what happens is insulin binds to the receptor, but the second messengers don't get released in the right ratio because the inositol ratio is wrong inside the cell. And so the insulin doesn't work as well. And we call that insulin resistance.
Right.
So what's happening is that there's plenty of insulin around when somebody has insulin resistance. In fact, there's too much insulin around. But the insulin can't make the cell do what it's supposed to because the ratio of those second messengers is out of whack. And the idea, the concept of supplementing inositols is to try and reestablish the proper ratio of myo to dechiro so that you improve insulin sensitivity throughout the body.
Right. So that means because we're not getting the right messages and we might be deficient in the inositols, that can exacerbate some of the symptoms that we deal with that are associated with insulin sensitivity, such as weight, such as high blood pressure, such as high lipids or cholesterol. So what are the benefits of inositols for PCOS? How can it help correct this?
Women with PCOS seek assistance for two major reasons. And as best as we can determine, it's usually about a 50-50 ratio as to why a woman typically seeks assistance. It's either because of metabolic issues, meaning all of those things that occur to the body as a result of insulin resistance and PCOS, meaning weight gain and acne and hair issues, elevated cholesterol and triglycerides. Those are the metabolic issues. Some women will approach their healthcare provider because they've noticed that they've got these issues, or they get blood work done and they're told, hey, you've got these issues. The other half of women with PCOS are seeking assistance because of fertility issues, because they're not getting their period regularly, they're not having any luck conceiving because they're not getting their period, they're not ovulating on a regular basis. And so the cool thing about inositols, when supplemented in the proper way, is that it can correct both issues. It can correct the metabolic issues. And there's a ton of clinical studies that have been published showing that, but it also can improve fertility issues dramatically as well. So it really has the ability to do cover both of the major areas that are affecting women with PCOS.
That's great. So it can actually be beneficial as far as helping with reestablishing ovulation.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
that's wonderful.
Yeah, I
So
mean, if you go to see a fertility doc, a woman with PCOS goes to see a fertility doc, and she's not getting a period regularly, she's not ovulating. The two drugs that have been sort of most widely used to try and force the ovary to start ovulating are clomid, clomiphene, and letrozole. Okay, and if you compare the statistics, the studies that have been published looking at what percentage of women who are not ovulating because of PCOS will then resume ovulation if you treat them with clomiphene or you treat them with letrozole. If you compare those numbers to the numbers of women who restore ovulation using inositols, they're pretty much in the same ballpark.
yeah. Yeah, so it's a really good alternative for people to try, and it for a lot of people seems to be, from people I've talked to, that the inositols are a lot easier on the body than taking some of these other medications.
No
Is that
question. I mean, look, clomiphene carries the risk of multiple gestation, in other words, twins or triplets. Okay, letrozole, there's some evidence. It's never really been conclusively decided whether or not it increases the risk of major birth defects. Okay, so these things are not without potential downsides. But
sure?
the one thing, let's be clear, the one thing about using inositols like ovasitol, our product, to restore ovulation is that it can take 3-4 months. Okay, it's not unlike taking clomiphene or letrozole, where a month later, boom, your ovaries kicking in. Okay, it takes a little bit more time for inositol supplementation to kind of work its magic. All right, and look, I was in my practice was focused on fertility treatment, and although my area of subspecialization was male fertility, still it's a couples issue. So, for all of the years I was seeing fertility couples, I kind of learned lots and lots about female infertility at the same time. And most couples dealing with infertility, they want to be pregnant yesterday.
Yeah,
Okay. It's like if you say, okay, here's a choice, here's an option that you might get your period next month. Now we start you on this prescription medication, or you can supplement inositols, but you have to be a little bit more patient. There's logistical issues that play in there. So
sure. And I think it's important to note, and maybe you can talk a little bit more about this, that often what people don't realize is when our body is out of balance, sometimes it can be harder to obtain things like infertility. But when we concentrate more on optimizing health and making you a healthier person, sometimes things like getting pregnant or lowering cholesterol will happen naturally because your body's in tune. Can you speak to that a little bit more?
yeah, absolutely. The one of the things that results from the fact that some women with PCOS seek assistance just because of their fertility problem is that they don't recognize all of the lifelong issues that PCOS brings with it. Okay. And there's this mistaken assumption that, okay, I'll do whatever I need to do to get pregnant, and then I'm not going to worry too much about this PCOS thing. Okay. And that's a huge mistake. And unfortunately, many fertility practices are understandably focused just on getting that woman pregnant. Okay. It takes a multidisciplinary, holistic approach to PCOS with a lifelong commitment, okay, to sort of staying healthy, to really kind of mitigate the negative effects of this condition. You can't look at it in isolation. Oh, this is just a fertility problem right now. And so you're absolutely right. I mean, the best plan is to approach this in a global kind of comprehensive way.
Right.
And in fact, this is one of the things that we try to, we have plenty of women who use Ovasitol and then they get pregnant and they figure, okay, once I'm pregnant, I'm in my first trimester and it looks like things are going well, that can just stop. But you know what? Women with PCOS who then get pregnant, they have triple the risk of gestational diabetes.
Yeah.
Okay. And if they stay on the inositols during their pregnancy, it cuts that risk in half. So
That's wonderful.
yeah, I mean, so the point is that there are benefits that go well beyond just conception.
Absolutely. And I'm so happy that you brought that up, because that's one of the things that to me has been concerning is, although infertility with PCOS is a vital topic, it's important to a lot of people, it's not the be all end all of PCOS. So being able to break it down and discuss what happens beyond the reproductive issues is vitally important. So I thank you for talking about that and talking about what happens after conception, because this is our heart interview. And one of the things people don't realize is things like gestational diabetes, things like preeclampsia, things like premature birth are all higher risk in patients with PCOS. It can be taxing on the heart of the mothers. It can be taxing on the hearts of the fetus. So we need to recognize that PCOS is lifelong and that we have to keep treating it through every stage of our life. So
the other thing to keep in mind is that this same underlying sort of derangement of what we call insulin resistance, where the insulin receptor is not functioning properly, which is what happens in PCOS, that's what leads to type 2 diabetes. And so metabolic syndrome, which is sort of pre-diabetes, and then type 2 diabetes, which is sort of when the whole body is experiencing insulin resistance, those things increase your risk of heart disease. They increase your risk of stroke. And so, if you're 30 years old and you're just thinking about having a family, you may not be worried too much about what might happen when you're 50. Okay. But if you've got PCOS, it's not going away.
right.
It's a lifelong thing. And so you need to focus on improving insulin sensitivity, on an ongoing basis.
Another thing that I really want to talk about, because often we see different types of inositols being sold, Myo, Decairo, proprietary blends, but not all inositols are equal. So what should we be looking for in order for inositols we take for PCOS to be effective? Because I feel like everybody's throwing out their own products, but
Sure.
they're
So,
not necessarily going to work.
so most of it is very interesting. The story behind inositols. The first study that was published in the medical journals about inositols and PCOS was in 1998 or 99, and it was in the
Wow.
New England Journal of Medicine. Okay.
Okay.
So it was done by some scientists at the University of Virginia. It was published in one of the most prestigious journals. And then, for reasons I won't go into, they dropped the whole matter. Okay. They didn't pursue it further. And for a number of years, there was nothing really being done in terms of more research. And then finally, the Europeans picked up the ball. And starting in about 2007, 2008, in Europe, they started doing all of these studies. First, they just used myo-inositol. Okay. But then they realized that better results were going to be obtained if they used a combination of myo-inositol and dichloroinositol, but in a very specific ratio. And that ratio is 40-1. The reason you want 40-1 is because that's the ratio in our blood, in our serum, okay. Under normal circumstances. And so they now have published studies looking at all these different ratios, 5-1, 10-1, 20-1, 40-1, 80-1, and 40-1 is clearly the most effective in terms of restoring metabolic balance, insulin sensitivity, restoring ovulation. Okay, so what do you look for in an inositol product? The first thing you want is a 40-1 product, okay? The second thing you want to look for is you want to make sure that the product has no excipients. And what is an excipient? It means an inert ingredient. So if you look at the label, what we call the supplement facts label, at the very bottom, it's going to say what else is in here besides inositols. And if you look, you'll find maltodextrin, you'll find rice bran, you'll find rice flour. I mean, all kinds of things that get put into certain products, really to make it just more manageable in terms of the production process. Make it pour more easily when they're pouring it into a canister or something like that, or a packet. So you want no excipients. You want just pure inositols, okay? And then the final thing is you want an independently content certified product. Now, there are 2 independent nonprofit programs in the United States that certify dietary supplements. There's USP, which stands for US Pharmacopoeia, and then there's what's called NSF International. And those are both nonprofit programs which will independently certify the content accuracy and the purity of dietary supplements. It's a program that the manufacturer has to sign up for, okay? At Theralogix, which is our company, every single one of our products maintains NSF certification. And we've done that for the past 20 years since we started the company. Why is that important? The reason is because the dietary supplement industry is filled with a lot of somewhat marginal players.
And that was very diplomatic, put it that way. But yeah,
so, here's the interesting thing: the price of myo-inositol, and this is a very interesting fact. There's only 3 factories in the world that produce myo-inositol, and they are all in China.
Wow. Okay.
So all myo-inositol in the world comes from China. Okay. And in the past 18 months, the price of myo-inositol has tripled.
That's crazy.
So part of that, it's all the whole supply chain thing and COVID shutdowns and all the crazy stuff that's going on in China. So the point is that the raw material has gotten much more expensive. Okay. So you want an independent third party content certifying any product that you're buying, telling you, hey, what's on the label is actually in the bottle, okay? You're getting what you think you are getting. So those are the 3 things I would say to look for. You want a 40-1 ratio, you want no excipients, and you want an independently content certified product. You'll also see some inositol products that throw in some additional stuff. And there are supplements that have shown benefit in PCOS, things like berberine and things like vitamin D and things like curcumin, okay, melatonin, okay, has shown benefit in PCOS. But we, as a company, we tend to stay away from what we call kitchen sink, where you throw everything in but the kitchen sink, okay? There are really good, inexpensive products you can get, we make a great melatonin product. It's one of the only independently content certified melatonin products. Vitamin D status is extremely important in PCOS. We make terrific prenatal vitamins with very high vitamin D content, and multivitamins with very high vitamin D content. So you can put together a program with products that are sort of more targeted to your individual need.
Yeah, and I think that's important because a lot of times when patients are seeking advice, they go to social media and they may see somebody say, well, I'm taking this, 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 and this, and then they will try to replicate that and they're not having the same results. So making sure that a plan is individualized is really important. And I know that you guys work with a lot of nutritionists and PCOS providers that help patients develop plans and incorporate these different types of supplements. So like me, you love talking about research. So I think you're going to like this next question that I ask you. So inositol is one of the most researched supplements for patients with PCOS. And I would love your input on what the research is telling us about using inositols in comparison to other medications and insulin sensitizers that may be used for PCOS.
Great question. So the standard medication that has been used as an insulin sensitizer for PCOS for 20 plus years is metformin. Metformin is a prescription medication. It was actually first approved by the FDA probably more than 30 years ago for type 2 diabetes. Metformin is a great drug. There's actually new research going on showing that metformin may actually be a longevity drug, even for people who don't have insulin resistance, okay? There's evidence that metformin might actually extend lifespan. The problem with metformin is that it's really hard to tolerate, and about 20% of people who start taking metformin have to stop it because the GI, the stomach side effects are just too much for them. There have now been at least a half dozen studies published comparing inositol supplementation with metformin. And in every one of these studies, inositol supplementation has been either as good or better than metformin in reducing insulin resistance. The only significant difference is that metformin users have 5 times the likelihood of getting significant side effects as do people with inositols. So comparing it to metformin, and there's an understandable tendency amongst physicians to trust prescription products, okay, especially when it's been around so long, okay. There's actually some new studies that have been published in the last couple of years showing that if you are using metformin, if you add in inositol supplementation, you get an even better result than metformin alone.
I love that.
Yeah, so it's a great option, and we are working hard to get more and more clinicians in the United States to be aware of it. We jokingly, because the Europeans published all of the science here, really up until now, really from about 2010 till now, almost 95% of the published science has come out of Europe. And so when we first launched Ovasitol, which is now 7 years ago, and we started talking to fertility practices around the country, we got a lot of blank stares, okay, from the doctors. And we jokingly started to call this NIH syndrome, which stood for not invented here, okay? This was something that they had not read about in the journals that they get in the United States, because most of the studies were being published in European journals, okay? But I'm happy to tell you that there are now at least 2 big studies going on here in the United States, one of which is NIH funded. It's being done up at University of Pennsylvania Medical Center by Dr. Rick LeGros. And the other one is at the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center. Both of those studies are using our product, Ovasitol. And they have the Penn State study is looking at metabolic endpoints. The Oklahoma study, very interesting study, they're dividing women with PCOS that are trying to conceive into two groups, letrozole alone or letrozole plus Ovasitol.
Wow.
Okay. So these studies take a long time and they're not inexpensive to do. The studies that have fertility endpoints, if they have a reproductive endpoint, they take especially long time to do, okay?
Yeah.
And they need much bigger study populations. So it's going to be a couple of years before we start seeing results, but hopefully this will reassure clinicians here in the United States who don't fully trust anything that's not published in a U.S. journal.
Absolutely. And actually, you gave me a nice little segue that I'm going to take advantage of. It's that Dr. LeGros is actually one of the presenters that is going to be part of Heart for PCOS. And if it's who I think it is at Oklahoma State, which is Dr. Wild, maybe. I'm not sure if it's Dr. Wild or not.
I'm trying to remember who our principal investigator is in Oklahoma. I can tell you in a minute, but I'm sure it's the same department. Yeah.
Yeah, so they will both be also taking part in Heart for PCOS. So I will make sure to get their additional input on these studies as well, because I think it's important to know about. So shifting gears a little bit, since this is Heart Health Month and we are celebrating the 10th anniversary of Heart for PCOS, I wanted to talk just a little bit about inositols and cardiometabolic health. How can taking a combination of myo and dechironinositols, like Theralogix Ovasitol, improve the metabolic profile of PCOS and help reduce risks for future health complications like cardiovascular disease?
Well, I mean, there's data that shows that lipid metabolism is improved. Okay, so cholesterol and triglycerides are lowered. We know that the impact of testosterone and what we call hyperinsulinemia, meaning excess insulin that's circulating in the bloodstream in women with PCOS. Those things are significant risk factors for cardiometabolic issues over time. And so lifelong supplementation to improve insulin sensitivity and keep lipid metabolism normalized, I think it just makes sense long term.
Right. So do you have any final thoughts or recommendations for those who may be interested in trying Ovasitol for PCOS?
Sure. So one of the things, it's funny, when we launched this product, like I said, about 7-8 years ago, we were the only inositol product. If you went on Amazon, or even on our website, there was nobody else selling this product. We kind of had read all of the European literature, and we realized there was great science here, and an opportunity existed, and so we produced Ovasitol. Now, if you go on Amazon, there's probably at least 20 similar products. Okay, products that will say, "Oh, this is an inositol product." The one piece of advice that I would sort of give is this: if you're looking for a reproductive benefit, restoring ovulation, okay, a minimum of 3 months of supplementation is required. Don't start taking it and expect that in 4 weeks it'll restore your period. It can happen, but most of the studies show it takes about 3 months, maybe a little longer, for ovulation to be restored. In terms of the metabolic issues, things like the testosterone, the androgenic issues, acne, hair loss, excess body hair, weight gain, those things take 6 months. Okay. And so there are lots of products. And the other thing is this, the dosing that you want to take is typically 2 grams, 2,000 milligrams, or 2 grams twice a day. Okay. 95% of the studies have used that dose. All right. There are plenty of products out there being sold which really only provide 2,000 milligrams a day. Or you buy a box and it'll say 30-day supply, but it's a 30-day supply if you take 2 grams a day. It's actually only 15 days if you take 4 grams a day. And even 30 days is not long enough to start seeing any benefit. So this is why Ovasitol, our product, it's a 90-day supply. It's kind of like that's the minimum that the minimum chance you're gonna have to give this to make a difference for you. So pay attention to daily dose and pay attention to how long you need to kind of commit to this option as a possibility.
Right. And there are 2 different ways that you can take it with Ovasitol. You can either get a canister with the powder, or you can also get the prepackaged dosage packs, which is what I use. I love my little pink packs. It's like
Okay,
a
so
lifesaver.
when we launched the product, it was just as a packet, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, the bag comes with 180 packets, 90 days, twice a day, right? With 10, 12 ounces of water or any kind of liquid twice a day, right? And then we started getting emails and, people would say, hey, can we make the packaging less, more environmentally friendly? We're like, okay, great, fine.
Right.
So we came out with a canister as well, and a canister that has a scoop. And so whichever way floats your boat, that's available.
Okay, well, I am going to ask you one more question, but before
Sure.
I do so, everyone who's been watching this interview, comment if you are interested in trying Ovasitol, and I will be picking one of you to receive a supply of Ovasitol just for being here and watching today. So keep commenting. And Dr. Ratner, my final question that I ask all of my guests is, why do you feel PCOS awareness and campaigns like Heart for PCOS are vital to the future of treating PCOS?
Probably the most important reason is so many women have been going undiagnosed.
Yeah.
It's a condition that is unfortunately falling through the cracks in the medical community. And I've seen all kinds of statistics, how it takes, four visits to 4 different clinicians before most women finally get the proper diagnosis, or 2 years of time. And so I think raising awareness does 2 things. It helps women who may be unaware that they're actually dealing with this to raise the question in their mind and maybe ask their healthcare provider for assistance. Or there's plenty of online assistance available now, like PCOS Girl and other important websites. But then the other thing that the advocacy does is it generates research. And I mean, real quickly, I'll tell you it's sort of a funny story. Rick LeGros, we had a mutual colleague, and after we came out with Ovasitol a few years back, that mutual colleague put me in touch with Rick LeGros. And I spent about an hour on the phone with him. This is 6, 7 years ago, explaining our product Ovasitol, and he was sort of at that point not really that familiar with the inositol literature, again because it was all European. But he's without a doubt published the most important PCOS studies in the United States over the last 15 years. He's the guy, okay? And most of those important studies have been funded by the NIH. So 6 months after my conversation with him, he called us up and he said, you know what? I'm really interested in this. Why? Well, I mean, partly why was because he had gone to some PCOS meetings on the East Coast, and he had heard about inositols, and he had heard about, he had heard the advocacy community questioning and asking about this. He did some more research. He came to us and he said, I'd like to apply to the NIH and get a grant to study this here at Penn State. Would you work on that with me? And we said, great, sure. So it took about a year and a half, but he got funding from the NIH, and he's using an ovasitol in the study. And that really is because of the community. It's because of the PCOS community driving that process.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I just have to add on to that because this is such an important point. People first need to understand that PCOS research is so devastatingly underfunded. We get less than 0.1% of funding for the NIH from the NIH to research PCOS. So advocacy is important, and Theralogix has been with PCOS Advocacy Day and PCOS Challenge for years, advocating every year with Congress to help raise awareness and the importance of funding this research. It matters, guys, because we matter, our health matters, and understanding it matters. So I have to thank you and Theralogix for always supporting this community, always standing together with us, being at our educational events that we've had, being at Advocacy Day with us. It's not just you guys trying to sell its product, it's you guys really partnering with this community and helping people reach better health, find hope, and a new future for PCOS. So I thank you very much for that. And I would love you to tell everyone how they can get in touch with Theralogix through social media, websites, shopping, and to follow your research and what you've been doing as well.
Sure. Well, I mean, our website is just theralogix.com. It's THERALOGIX.com. Ovasitol and all of our products are available on our website, but also on Amazon and Walmart.com. Yeah, I mean, and then we have, by the way, we do have 3 full-time registered dietitians at Theralogix. And, you know, both customers and people who are thinking about getting one of our products are free to call us and speak to our dietitians with questions. And they spend a good portion of their day answering questions, not only from customers, but also from clinicians who are trying to learn more about these various approaches. So on our website, you can find contact phone numbers. You can also email us. There's all kinds of customer support available besides the dietitians as well.
And you're on social media as well. So I will make sure that everybody has all of the contact information so they can learn much more about the company, about the products, and about the wonderful people that all of you are. Everyone, I wanted to thank you for joining us, and make sure to check in the comments because I will be announcing who is winning the supply of ovasitol. And Dr. Ratner, I thank you so much for taking your time and sharing your expertise with us to help us learn a little bit more today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Everyone, make sure to check throughout the month of February. We have more events, more speakers, and more information on how to get involved to keep the hearts of the PCOS community beating strong. Until next time, thank you and have a great day.